Having this for dinner seemed appropriate considering what I watched today. That's right, Sonic the Hedgehog is back, and this time he's a live action movie. Now, we all know the cluster bomb the trailer was. Uh, yeah, Sonic looked terrible in the trailer, but thanks to fan outrage, excuse me, um, Sonic looks like Sonic. And well, let's start at the beginning. First off, let me say that the human characters in the cast, great. James Marsden, he's like the ultimate Boy Scout. Why he hasn't been cast as Superman at some point, I have no idea. But he is able to bow to the madness and play straight a completely absurd scenario, like the Easter Bunny movie he was in. He played that straight, and for good or ill, it worked for him. As for Jim Carrey, this Jim Carrey is the most Jim Carrey he has been in a long time. I felt like Jim Carrey had his energy back. Like the kind of manic energy he had when he was Ace Ventura and the Riddler. And he poured all this narcissism and sociopathic behavior into his version of Robotnik, who was so sure he was the Ubermensch that every time Sonic outwitted him, he lost more and more of his identity. He just became more and more of a caricature because of his frustrations with Sonic thwarting him repeatedly. And honestly, it worked. By the end, he looks like he's supposed to look. He sounds like he's supposed to sound. And if they make a sequel, I really, really hope they do. Jim Carrey is definitely going to make one heck of a Robotnik proper, because this Robotnik was like a proto cartoon Robotnik, and he was just entertaining to watch. He was never boring. Now for the effects and the voice acting. The guy who plays Sonic's voice in the movie is not Jaleel White. He's a new guy. But this new guy is decent. He plays Sonic like a hyperactive, easily distracted teenager who, when he slows down, is just weighed down by the fact that he is so lonely and so isolated that that's why, clearly, why he doesn't stop moving. Because then the sadness will catch up to him. He made a bunch of pixels into a wooby, basically. You want to shelter the poor hedgehog. As for the effects, Sonic looked, they changed his look, so he was more cartoony, but that was good. Sonic had to look like Sonic, otherwise it wouldn't be Sonic, he'd be something else. But they left little details like quills mixed in with his signature spikes, which made him feel more organic, but not in a weird way. um, his lightning effects and spin dash were spot on, and overall, he was fairly satisfying to look at, as were Robotnik's signature weapons, the Robo Badniks. Now, they eschewed from the cartoons and the video games, but I think that was a good thing. They had a more real world feel, like some of these robots could exist in real life as modified vehicles and modified drones, but they had an overall theme which was a signature of Robotnik. They all looked like eggs, basically. And they all looked like HAL 9000 if he had access to tech which gave him mobility. Also, they didn't look overly cartoony. They were clearly animated, but at the same time, they weren't hard to believe, you know? Overall, the effects in this movie were decent. Now for the action and story, they flowed very well. Like the previous movie I described, you know which one I'm talking about. Both films felt a bit shorter than they really were. This one especially. Because it and the previous movie I mentioned get right to the point. They don't beat around the bush. And yes, there are plenty of references, but they're organic references. If you're a longtime fan of Sonic like me, you could spot them like that. Now, there were a couple of references which I didn't get, which might have been part of other later bits of Sonic lore. Like, there's an owl character who I didn't recognize, but there were other aspects of Sonic that I did recognize and appreciated. Overall, as far as the dubious history of video game movies goes, this is definitely a winner in my book. It might not please everyone, and some people might be turned off to Jim Carrey's over animatedness. That's not a real word. But honestly, I enjoyed seeing this movie. It is a positive in my book. And I really hope we get a sequel, because I want to see where this franchise goes from here. This is Mr. J signing out and reminding you, chili dogs are awesome. And never underestimate an impatient hedgehog. Gotta run.